Welcome, and thank you for attending tonight. I'm David Weiss, the Mayor of Shaker Heights. For those of you I have not met yet, let me start by thanking Dr. Glazer, Dr. Wilkins, and the Shaker Schools for hosting this event tonight. We are very appreciative of you providing this opportunity for us. This is an exciting night. This is the kickoff for our Forward Together project. This has been in the works for quite some time, and we're very happy to present this first piece to the public tonight. The purpose of Forward Together is to develop a forward-looking strategy for our current and future community facilities and assets. The real key to this process and program is the collaboration between the three taxing authorities here in Shaker, the schools, the city, and the library. To my knowledge, anyway, one of the first times that has happened, certainly in our community and maybe elsewhere. We have several goals for the project. First and foremost is to create a long-range vision for our community facilities. Second, to be good stewards of our limited resources, to leverage our partnership and common goals between the three authorities, taxing authorities, and to build on our legacy of creative thinking about the best practices about how to effectively and efficiently use our civic assets. Tonight's thought leader panel is the first step of many interaction between the planning group and the public, and we're very excited for the program tonight. Let me just say that there are a couple goals for the program tonight, and that is to be educational, inspirational, provide an opportunity to learn, and to think beyond maybe your current views about how we manage and use our community assets. You'll have some opportunity for input tonight and much more in the coming days and weeks, but for tonight, I will challenge you to listen, to learn, and perhaps dream a little bit, and then we'll proceed. So with that, let me turn it over to Jeff Isaacs, the president of the school board.
Good evening, everyone. It's my honor on behalf of the schools to welcome you here. We're delighted to be the host organization for this kickoff. And it's been a pleasure to work with representatives of the city and the library to organize Forward Together over these past few months. And I wanted to say a thank you to Mayor Weiss and to Mr. Glazer. And also thank you to everyone else who supported this effort from each organization. It falls to me tonight to share the details of the next Forward Together opportunity. So mark April 11th in your calendars for the Future of Facilities Vision workshops. So there'll be two workshops identical in format and substance at different times and locations on the same day. So please attend one, the one that's most convenient for you. There'll be a workshop on the morning of April 11th at the main library. That's 9:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. And there'll be a second workshop opportunity that same evening at the community building. That'll be 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. And we are very much looking forward to hearing from you, the community, about your ideas for the future of our community facilities. And we want to hear your big ideas and your small ideas. Well, thank you, and also join me in wishing our Shaker schools are sending 330 students and 150 friends and family off to Italy first thing tomorrow morning. So we wish them all well, and I get to go, so I'm going to let you know how it goes. But thank you very much. So, Brian, please.
Good evening. My name is Brian Glazer. I'm president of your Shaker Heights Library Board of Trustees, and I just want to echo the mayor and Jeff in welcoming everybody to this very special opportunity this evening to dream. And I'm a city planner by training, so part of my job where I work is to dream big, and that's, as Jeff mentioned, we're looking for big thoughts, little thoughts, kind of thoughts that may not make sense right out of the box, but this is the opportunity to dream. We're thinking about the future, 15 to 20 years ahead. What will our facilities need to support? What do we need to start thinking about today so that we can be best positioned to continue to provide high-quality community services and facilities to our residents and businesses. And just to give you an idea of how long it takes to do these things, David and I were on City Council 20 years ago when we first started talking about Van Aken-Warrensville. And that was the very beginning conversations about that, and it went through planning stages, and here we are, and we all get to visit Mitchell's and the other stores there. So, and by the way, 20 years goes by just like that. So while 20 years people say, it's not even worth thinking about, believe me, it is. So sit back, dream a little bit, listen to our experts. They'll give you some ideas of what may be coming down the road. And as Jeff mentioned, there will be opportunities for input over the next couple of months, and we really welcome that. And I'm sure Shaker will, as always, be very involved with that. So thank you. And then I also get to introduce the moderator for this evening. And our moderator is this evening Mr. Felton Thomas, Jr., Executive Director of the Cleveland Public Library and a Shaker resident. He has been Executive Director of the Cleveland Public Library since 2009 and is also the immediate past president of the Public Library Association, having served on that board since 2012. Prior to his position at CPL, Felton served as the Director of Regional Branch Services for the Las Vegas Clark County Library District. Can we use slot machines for increased revenue? We'll let him answer that. I'm working on it. A native of Las Vegas, Felton became the youngest employee in the history of the Las Vegas Library at the age of 13 when the librarian noticed his enthusiasm and encouraged him to become a page. Felton earned his undergraduate degree in psychology from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, his master's in library science from the University of Hawaii, and is currently pursuing his PhD in managerial leadership management at Simmons College. In the State of the Library presentation at the City Club last month, Felton pointed out how libraries have evolved from librarians retrieving books from closed shelves upon request to today, where libraries provide after-school lunches, Wi-Fi hotspots, computer and technology training, 3D printing, passports, community programs, and oh yes, they still provide books, though now increasingly online in digital formats. Felton noted that libraries have stayed in close touch with their users and have changed and continue to change to meet the changing needs of those users. And that's sort of the theme of what we're going to talk about this evening. Felton.
Well, good evening, everyone. Oh, okay. I think we need to try that again because we're in Shaker, right? Good evening, everybody. Good evening. All right, thank you so much. So, one of the things, and I just flipped the switch. Oh, there we go. Already out of control. And I know the number one first thing everybody said when I walked up here is like, I've been to Vegas many times. I've never seen a library in Las Vegas. So yes, there are libraries in Las Vegas. So if I asked everyone to take out their phones and go to Google, which I would never ask you as a librarian to do, but if I asked you to do that and look up the word leadership, you would come back with 8.6 billion responses to that query. And I think you would not be surprised to know that last year, in the United States, we spent over $50 billion on leadership seminars, books, classes, trainings. Leadership is something that we work extremely hard to find, and yet, sometimes as we look around the country, we find it is in great need. And so to see what the mayor and the school board and the library have done to collaborate around their leadership to get to this point is really unbelievable in many ways, because you don't see this happening very often, right? So as we look forward with this panel to discuss how these folks are seeing their different areas moving forward in the future, I want you to think about it from the standpoint of what is being done in the city of Shaker is really different than many cities across the country who are struggling with leadership to collaborate. I'm going to start by introducing our panel, and then our panel will come up and speak. I will have a set number of questions for them, and then we will open it up to you to ask your questions. And we'd like you to come up and ask your questions at the microphones, because we will have, we're recording this, and we like the audio from it, but also, obviously, you'd like to see yourself on TV. So you just put that in place. So, Terry Schwartz. Terry is the director of the Kent State University's Cleveland Urban Design Collaborative and holds a master's degree in city and regional planning from Cornell University. Her work at the CUDC includes neighborhood and campus planning, commercial and residential design guidelines, and ecological strategies for vacant land reuse. Through this work, she launched the Shrinking Cities Institute and established Pop-Up City, an initiative to temporarily activate vacant and underutilized sites in Cleveland. She also teaches in the graduate design curriculum for the KSU College of Architecture and Environmental Design. In 2009, Terry received the Cleveland Arts Prize for Design, and personally working with her, I know that Terry is very, very smart. Evan T. Struble, also known as Timotheus. Evan is the Associate State Librarian for Library Development at the State Library of Ohio. Prior to assuming his current role, Evan worked as a library consultant with the State Library for more than 6 years. In 2015, Evan received the Diana Basilius Emerging Leader Award from the Ohio Library Council, where he serves on various councils and communities and committees. This award recognizes an outstanding commitment to the profession, including advocacy in special areas such as intellectual freedom, library innovation, outreach, and expansion of library services. And finally on our panel, we have Michele Pomerantz, who will speak on the future of schools. Michele is the Director of Regional Collaboration for Cuyahoga County. Michele began her career as a classroom teacher in Cleveland before joining the American Federation of Teachers as Deputy Director of the Office of the President. Her experience at the national level gave her a deep understanding of federal educational reform policies and advocacy strategies. In her current position, Michele supports regional collaboration amongst the 59 municipalities and stakeholder groups in Cuyahoga County. Woo! She is also responsible for advocacy at the state and federal level, representing Cuyahoga County's interests in securing equitable funding and policies that promote our ability to advance our regional priorities. Through that work, Michele seeks to utilize collaboration to increase prosperity and educational opportunities for all residents of Cuyahoga County. Could you please give all the panelists a big round of applause? So Terry, if you would come up. Terry Schwartz.
No, I'm first.
Oh, okay.
Switch.
Michele. Oh, you guys switched on me. Nobody told me. That's what they do to the moderator in Shaker Heights, I see. No one told. Come on up, Michele. Michele Pomerantz.
Good evening, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to all of you today. I'd like to thank Mayor Weiss, Superintendent Wilkins, Board Chair Glazer, and also Board Chair Isaacs for the opportunity to speak to you today about some things that I think are going to be pretty exciting for the city of Shaker and the region as a whole. My experiences after more than 28 years in education have given me a little bit of craziness, but also a little bit of especially different perspective in terms of education policy and what it's like to be in the classroom, to be at the district level, and also to be at the national level. Let me begin by saying that to me the best thing about schools, especially when you're in education as long as I have, is the universal thread of schools and the way they connect us all. I was walking up and down the hallways a little bit before coming to speak to you today, and heard a little bit of the students talking to one of the custodians about the upcoming prom, seeing somebody that was playing and practicing basketball. And I think about all the experiences that we have as adults, sitting at desks, walking through hallways, even trying to figure out our locker combination, whether it's at the little combination lock or even in the locker. And it's one of these kind of rites of passages that we kind of go through, and a collective thing that we do as American citizens to understand and the joy and nostalgia that we feel about first dates, proms, figuring out that lock combination or who you're going to sit next to in the cafeteria. And all of these things bring us a sense of nostalgia, a sense of family. And one of the ladies who was signing in, I'm not sure which one, was like, my daughter went here a long time ago and it looks just the same. And it feels that sense of home. And unfortunately, these feelings of firsts and rites of passages mask the reality and the disheartening fact that public education that began in the 1800s has not really evolved. Sure, the curriculum is advanced, but the most matter of fact is that if Rip Van Winkle were to come back today, the place he'd feel most comfortable would be at an American high school because of the way it looks and the way it feels. And again, there's that nostalgia and that pride and that sense of ownership, but then there is the reality that technology has advanced, but considering our facilities only, our country's schools were developed in the 19th century with the Industrial Revolution needs for rote learning, note-taking, and end-of-the-year exams that were required for labor and one job until retirement. I'm sure I'm not the first person you've heard from that say our education system is long overdue for some changes. Our children must gear up for the gig economy. 15 years from now, 65% of the students graduating from Shaker Heights today will be working at jobs that don't currently exist. Our school buildings have become shopping malls in an Amazon world. As this change and the shift in the workplace and education come, there's also a time in the schools in Midwest are losing enrollment. A lot of people are moving from the Rust Belt down to the Sun Belt. So schools all over Cuyahoga County and schools all over the state of Ohio are declining in enrollment. Some people think it's because they have choices between charter schools and home schools, but even taking out the consideration for school choice, our school buildings, which were once built, are no longer have this much need for this much space. Old schools built to house, or in many experiences, warehouse, are built for 2,000 to 3,000 students and are harder to operate due to the building code expectations that correspond with the year they are built and not the current code. A lot of my time spent with the Cleveland School District was not always in education policy, but it was working with the Ohio Facilities Commission to help provide resources and support to increase new buildings or to finagle ways to use current resources to keep older buildings alive. And alive necessarily was just keeping the bricks and mortar. So many of the schools that we still have in America are older schools that have good bones, as a lot of my construction operations people will say. But they are structures that are that physically and financially restrain the capabilities of educating classrooms of today and tomorrow. The future has never changed so quickly. Consider your iPhone, consider Venmo, consider these things that I'm not even sure what to use or how to use them, but my 4-year-old niece can help figure it out for me. This whole iPhone thing is kind of specifically interesting because by the time you invest the money into it, it's already outdated. My husband finally upgraded from his flip phone, and I had nothing to do with the demise of his flip phone, even though he thinks I did. Honestly, I had nothing to do with it. It fell. But the idea of him getting a new phone was really a conflict for him, and he finally did upgrade. And this iPhone became this inherent conflict for us. He didn't want to pay the money, it was too much, he just didn't want to invest in something, and he felt the flip phone was good enough for the ways that he wanted to communicate. Finally, again, it broke. I had nothing to do with it, honest. But the love and nostalgia over that older phone or an older school with dwindling public resources or how to get to that new place where you have that new capacity can be a conflict all over the country and also I think specifically in Cuyahoga County. How does a community support 21st century learning into brick and mortar facilities that can't even support central air conditioning? One way I suggest is the path that your mayor, your library board, and your school district are beginning today, and that is to create a vision for all three entities that reflects the history, nostalgia, and priorities with the cost-sharing collaborations that increase the quality of life for all residents of Shaker Heights. Next slide. Anytime I could put up a slide with President Obama on there, sorry, I didn't just find one for that reason. It does connect, but. Across the country, there's examples of community development that bring community resources together to establish a new culture of sharing. One place this is happening is through the Say Yes to Education partnership that currently exists in Syracuse, Buffalo, New York. And this approach has most recently been adopted by the Cleveland schools as they share the governing roles between county government, city government, and school district government to support quality education for the whole child and the whole family, and results in students more prepared for college. There is a free college scholarship for each graduate at the end of 12th grade, and while some people think, especially the students and their parents, get excited about the idea of free tuition to college, that is not the cool or sexy part to me. The idea that bureaucracies of the county, which I work for now, the city, which I work for under the school district, and the school district that will break down silos to be mutually invested in wraparound services that support the whole community is inspiring. This shared governance puts families and students first, not school buildings or employees. Like the song from the Broadway musical Hamilton, anytime I can quote Hamilton, I always try to too. The room where it happens, when you've got skin in the game, you stay in the game. But you don't get a win unless you play in the game. If you're not part of the leadership on part of the initial ideas around these things, and you're not responsible for the outcomes, then collaboration and opportunity for shared resources can be troublesome at best. So considering the Say Yes to Education, imagine the amount of duplicated services that are provided by schools, cities, and county governments who are now all three responsible for the graduation of each child in their community. That mutual commitment can help find the resources and provide the political will necessary to challenge the community to be better. Another example of communities where shared sources is in Atlanta, Georgia, the purpose-built community. This purpose-built community model is utilized in Georgia, Florida, and Columbus, Ohio. In this purpose-built community, the schools remain the center of the community, but mixed-income housing and recreation centers are embedded within the school building or on the campus itself. One particular aspect of this model is the community quarterback. The community quarterback, oh, he's up here. Here's up, right underneath at the, kind of at the base of the roof. That community quarterback essentially is an authority in the community that is not elected, usually a philanthropic group like a foundation or even a sports team. That requires the skin in the game that I mentioned earlier. That skin in the game for all leaders in neighborhood to ensure that the trust, shared vision, and focus during a transition remains constant. In government, and especially in schools, the idea of long-term focus and planning can sometimes be thrown to the wayside, or whatever next emergency or state funding issue or crisis comes into play. So again, that community quarterback kind of helps support those three levels of government working, collaborating together. It's also important to note that the community quarterback in this model is not an elected official, due in part because of the political capital it costs to help change and improve systems. While these two are examples of school community collaborations, I don't believe that either one of them would be a good fit for Shaker. And the reason that is because I think Shaker is well positioned to start their own journey. Just so happened today that the top 25 places to live in Ohio, number 2 is Shaker Heights. Now this slide came with a picture of Pinecrest, if you guys look at cleveland.com, which I'm like, why would they put Pinecrest at the picture? They were number like 11. So I don't know if Kathy Mulcahy knows somebody, she's Mayor of Orange, don't tell her I said that, if she knows somebody at cleveland.com, but I don't understand why their picture wasn't of Shaker at that, so I put the picture of Shaker up instead. So again, it's not just a rating from a niche place about the top 25 places to live. It's starting with resources that are already in existence, collaboration that already is in existence that positions this community well. It's the integral history and connectedness that Shaker Heights and the civic pride that already has there that positions this community well to begin their visioning sessions, not at the time of a crisis, not in the time of an emergency, but to begin preparing now for opportunities that will help support students, scholars, families, and seniors. So again, Plain Dealer announced Shaker Heights, #2 place to live in all of Ohio, beating out Solon, Orange, and all of the West Side, to my family members' chagrin. And I've already heard from them on Facebook about the unfairness of it all, but also checking and seeing if maybe they can move here, so that might end up ticking up a little bit in that. Another feather in the cap of the collaboration is the fact that you have a new mayor, newer, not new, but newer mayor initiating this process, and coming soon a new superintendent. Now, I don't know your new superintendent, but I'll venture to say that having the new superintendent coming from within Shaker Schools already positions him well enough to understand the context of the schools and families, and the best able to move quickly and adapt to the collaboration and with the mayor, school board, and library board. So again, when I'm looking at ways to consolidate, to support, taking ways to collaborate, you already have an interested party, you have leaders, a tone at the top, and you have institutions that are ready to do this work already. So you're on your way. At your next visioning session, I hope you'll consider the following tips for success. First, you must have, and this is, I wanted to find a picture of like the school that would be like this great school you guys should like look to, but I realized the minute I pick this cool looking school, it's going to be outdated. I mean, by the time I push click, it'll be something newer and better, and I also didn't want to think about what other people have done, but also know that the beauty of, you know, Shaker Heights and their buildings, that there'll be something that I didn't want to put any kind of pictures out there. But I thought utilizing virtual reality, understanding that technology is important, but it's not just technology. It's understanding how to use your space creatively to provide more green space, to provide more transition and walking spaces in between and bike lanes throughout all the school districts and the municipality are things that I think that it'd be helpful not to have a picture in mind. So as your visioning session goes forward, I hope you consider the following tips for success. First, you must have staff dedicated to assist in the coordination among partners. To think that the mayor and the board chiefs are going to be able to do this alone, it would be great. They could have the passion, they could have the tone at the top, but there has to be some deliberate staff that or I'm not going to say all their main job, but they have to be very overtly connecting the organizations in a way that sees that as a strength. You already have leadership on board, but a well-structured vision and understanding of assets that you currently have in space should be consistent and understood by all. A shared vision of stakeholders, including you, as well as students who I don't see in the audience, but I know are interested in what's going to happen to them. I'm sure they're all getting ready for Italy tomorrow, which if I were, I would thank you for being here, because I would be at home packing. A shared vision of stakeholders, including citizens, parents, faith-based community, business owners, and senior citizens, will help build this foundation and help hold elected officials more accountable and keep them and their staffs more focused in ensuring that they're ready to be there for the long term. I think that's going to be really instrumental. Though this exercise works to kind of like look at facilities, I think it can also help develop strategies that support a variety of outcomes, including, but not limited to, increasing opportunities for physical activity, broadening services for families, seniors, and students, and connectivity through the creative use of green space and transportation planning. One of my tips I also want to make sure is that you look out for cynics. A lot of times, anytime you do anything to change, whether it's to change the mural out front or anything, comes with people who are automatically going to be resistors to that. And my advice is to do things with people, not to people. Sometimes it can be long and tiring to over-communicate and over-support. At one point in time, decisions have to be made, but the more people you have at that table, and the more championing, thinking of that community quarterback or whatever else kind of champions you can to get past some concrete thinking, the better. Entities like the library, school, and municipality must focus on some similar same goals, and bringing together bureaucracies that individually focus on different or competing goals can be problematic. Now again, I know Scott Stevens is a great writer, but he probably isn't going to be writing the state of the city for the mayor, so we're not going to have all goals be the same, but you are going to find ones that you can kind of continue to look to be the same, that are, and then I don't want to project what it should be or could be, but some goals that you all measure for success and have that accountability will help the staff be part of something bigger. I urge you to continue to collaborate towards going forward together to create a strategy that's going to leverage your plethora of existing services and relationships and use shared stewardship, because I think that's something that is popular, especially in the day when everybody's tax valuations on their homes are going up. Shared stewardship into a path will also help increase buy-in and the livelihood of all residents of Shaker Heights. And then finally, as the Director of Regional Collaboration, I pledge the county's partnership in master facilities planning, any other ways that I can support, and look forward to being part of your journey. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, you did better for Felton. That's all right. We like Felton better. My name is Evan Struble. I'm the Associate State Librarian for the State Library of Ohio, and I'm really pleased that I get to come and address all of you fine folks. This is actually my first time in Shaker Heights. I got a little tour of the community and the library and have taken a look at your school, and I'm just blown away with some of the warmth that I've already been shown in just the 2 or 3 hours that I've been here. So thank you for letting me come and talk to you a little bit about the future of libraries. You may be wondering, why does this dude talk to us about the future of libraries? I have been working in libraries. This is my 22nd year of working in libraries. I'm one of the young ones like Felton that started really young. And I have worked in some very interesting library buildings that I'll talk to you about in just a second. As the Associate State Librarian, a part of my purview is to visit libraries around the state and help them with some strategic planning, some future planning, not always about the facilities, sometimes about their own strategic direction or thinking about staffing issues or that sort of thing. But certainly I have seen my share of libraries. I am involved with the American Library Association. I'm very fortunate to serve on some committees with them, and so even at the national level, I've had some exposure to some trends that libraries, public libraries, are experiencing. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of those with you tonight. I promise I own more than one sweater. On the drive up here tonight, it dawned on me that I am wearing the sweater that's in my headshot. So, you know, librarians don't make a ton of money, but I do own more than one shirt. My first library, so I grew up in rural southeastern Ohio. On the Ohio River, I basically swam across that polluted river when I was young and didn't know any better to West Virginia and back because I thought it was cool. My very first library in Meigs County was actually a former bank. The children's librarian's office was in the bank vault. She got locked in there 3 times over the 2 years that I worked there. While I was working at the Meigs County Library, while I was in high school, they opened a branch that was in a renovated barn. It was beautiful. It was very drafty. It still smelled of cows. But it was delightful and charming in its own way. It's funny because now, 22 years later, I'm working at the State Library of Ohio, which is a state agency, but, and I don't know if you've been to our facility or not, but it is in an old mining manufacturing building that's over 100 years old. Literally, railroad cars would be wheeled into this building to be repaired, worked on, welded, what have you. I don't really know exactly what they did, and then wheeled right on out the back. So if you come into our facility, and you can, we're open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, please come down and see us in Columbus. You can actually see the archways where the trains would come through at the back of the building to be worked on. Needless to say, a building like that has some of its own challenges. I was trying to think when I actually worked in a library that was actually built to be a library, and I think I was 21. That was the Westerville Public Library. Anyways, I would like for you to indulge me for a second, if you don't mind. If you haven't figured out, I'm kind of a casual speaker. If you wouldn't mind, and I promise I'm not going to hypnotize you, just shut your eyes for a second and indulge me. I want you to think about the library of your childhood. Whenever that is, I'm not going to ask ages, I'm not even going to guess. But just shut your eyes a minute, and I want you to picture that library from your childhood. I want you to think about the placement of the materials. I want you to think about the staff. I want you to conjure up a smell, if you want to go that deep. Think about what that library looks, what that evokes in your memory. Okay? Now, if I asked you to close your eyes again and picture the library of the future, what are you picturing? Walk into the facility. Maybe you have an airborne skateboard that takes you into the building. Maybe it's Jetsons, I don't know. Picture what that library of the future looks like to you. So, my intent here is not to force you into space colonies or, Jetsons-era library facilities. Some of the examples I have up on the board here, I mean, the libraries from San Diego, from China, from London, they are out there. They're interesting in their own way. Perhaps not right for this community, but they serve their own communities. So this is not the point of my talk. I am not here to convince you that Shaker Heights needs a library branch on the moon. We'd have to make sure we find the right size spacesuits to get us there, apparently. That's not the point of me being here. And I also want to make sure that everyone in attendance knows that the point of my talk is to be a little more aspirational. I'm going to share with you things that I've seen around the state, around the country. And just remember that those ideas and those viewpoints can be scaled up or down, or thrown in the garbage bin if you don't agree with them either. But I'm just here to kind of share some insights with you. As Felton alluded to in his introduction, libraries are more than just Google, no matter what people would like to say. A future-focused library is not a website or a database or an app. Those are components of a future-focused library, certainly, but one does not replace the other. So when we think about how we want to push the facility of the library forward, we don't want to forget the physicality of the building as well, okay? So I'd like to talk just briefly about some very basic library trends that I have noticed in terms of how libraries are using their physical space as a way to start to get your creative juices flowing. The first thing that I would like to talk about is the concept of modularness. Gone are the days where a library is built and then we say, forever, this is where the youth materials will be kept. Forever, the checkout desk will be between these two pillars, and we will not move them no matter what people say. All right? A lot of libraries are moving towards furniture components that are on wheels. They have brakes, of course, so they're not just slip-sliding across the library. They are looking at ways in which the library facility can be swapped out as programming calls, so perhaps not changing where the youth materials are kept forever. Maybe it's just for an evening, if you have an awesome speaker or musician or artist that's going to come in and talk to the community. So accessibility is another issue as well, certainly as our population ages, and certainly as we cater to differing types of families in terms of their size, in terms of children who might be neurodiverse or on the autism spectrum. You have to think about the ways in which families will interact with your library space. And it's different than it has been in the past. You have to think about perhaps more objects that are tangible and touchable, less kind of museum thought behind pieces that are in the library as well. Certainly technology is a big component of libraries as physical space going forward. You know, I kind of joked that, you know, a library is not Google, and it's not. But we do need to be conscious of some of the changes in technology and how the library is being used. Certainly over my career, I've seen the shift from the giant, boxy Apple IIe computers that never move from that cubicle or that wooden carrel, and to now where it's just empty tables with plugs on the top because everyone's bringing in their own devices, and they're not even laptops anymore, they're just phones and they need to charge it. So thinking about how your patrons, or how library patrons would use a physical space for their own technology, not just the technology that the library provides. Community rooms and meeting space, that is always at a premium, no matter what community you're in. There's always a group that needs to have that space, and so more of it, more accessible. Thinking about how they might enter or egress after hours, possibly. So looking at community space, meeting room space, perhaps with a different eye, so that it's not quite so closed up, quite so locked up, quite so barriered, for lack of a better term. A big movement for using library space is as a co-working space. I think, as we know, some industries don't necessarily require their employees go to work. What is that like? Oh my gosh. So libraries are being used because employees have no office amenities. They have no space to do the work that their companies are asking them to do. It's very interesting. I don't know, has anyone actually been to the State Library of Ohio? So, oh my goodness, wow, all right. So around us is quite a bit of development, and it's been really interesting, some growing pains for us even, because more public are using our building than is typical for a state agency, and they're using it because the folks that are living there in Columbus need that co-working space. They need the opportunity to use the Wi-Fi, to use the electronics, the plugs. They need to be able to have a quiet space where they can take very discreet phone calls or not so discreet phone calls. So consider that co-working movement when thinking about how you might adapt your library space. And outdoor spaces, I mean, I know, okay, fine, we're in northeastern Ohio. Even in central Ohio, you might think I'm crazy for suggesting outdoor spaces. So many of the libraries that I visit and consult with have really started to think about how their library services extend outdoors, whether it be through story walks, where parts of the story are kind of shared on placards through a garden or a hedgerow or whatever, to literal gardens where library staff or agriculture extension agents through a partnership are teaching library patrons how to garden. But please remember that the library is more than just its physical space. A strong library of today or the future is rooted in the people that work to make it a success. As you know, some of the partnerships that have started with tonight's endeavor, quite frankly, I don't always see. I love seeing all these folks in the community that are coming together, that have a goal and have a purpose. That communication piece is key. But just remember, when you're thinking of the library in terms of a physical space, it's important to think about what is actually going to transpire there, okay? The programming and the offerings will kind of dictate how the space is developed. And so I just want to talk very briefly about some trends I'm seeing in terms of library programming and partnerships. I know that Shaker has just started this service of offering passport services. Several libraries are picking that up in Central Ohio as well. Kind of thinking beyond what perhaps traditionally libraries have been expected to do in terms of e-government, as more and more government agencies or entities are kind of scaling back their local reach. Libraries are being called upon to kind of play that role, that intermediary between the public and e-government, and certainly passport services is one way to think about that. In this slide, I have a picture of an artist in residence from Appleton, Wisconsin. I kind of love this program. And I believe the Ohio Arts Council has something similar in place in Ohio, where a library can actually host an artist in residence, just like it sounds, for a finite period of time, and that artist in residence would work with your staff and work with the library patrons on some sort of community art project. I just loved learning about this collage project in Appleton. Certainly, folks that are experts at various trades. You see the gentleman there in the bottom right. You might have heard the term makerspaces, a place where we have lots of cool gadgets and gizmos for the public to try and test and what have you. And those are all well and good, and I would encourage anyone to explore that. But certainly taking it up a notch to trade things like power tools and things that are a little bit beyond the norm, perhaps. You'll see that I did a shout out to College Depot there at Phoenix Public Library. I know that there's a similar setup with a Cleveland entity that's in the Barberton Library as well. Basically, they are there's staff from that college group that is in the library there in Phoenix and can help their constituents apply for financial aid, get into college, and that sort of thing. Healthcare partnerships. There was a library in Yonkers, New York, that is just embedding a healthcare professional amongst their staff to help with basic healthcare needs. Again, I know it sounds a little bit afield of perhaps of where libraries have been, but again, my talk is just to kind of push and let you know of certain things that are out there. Thinking about how the community might want to know this while they're in your space. So why not have the opportunity for them to check their blood pressure, as an example. I like the yoga at the library seems to be a movement. There's Zumba. There's all sorts of fitness experts as a trend I'm seeing in libraries, which is a lot of fun. Speaking of fun, the one at the top, the Lawrence Public Library, the partnership with their Humane Society, they had a series of programs called Catter Days. And I'm sorry, I'm a librarian, so I'm a cat person. And every Saturday, they had a cat-themed program that was kind of in tandem with their Humane Society, and the cats were there so they could actually be adopted or just pet if you're feeling stressed. I thought that was super cute. I mentioned this earlier with kind of the move towards e-government, but certainly social workers, for those types of needs that might come about at libraries, thinking about ways to partner or embed social workers as part of the library experience. I have in my notes here in capital letters, fun. Don't forget to have fun. When you think about some of these programs and partnerships in the library, I think we get kind of wrapped up in this idea that it has to be super, super educational, academic. It can be fun. You know, you can bring cats in the library and see what happens. So I think just a couple things I want to touch on before I wrap up, and I'm sorry, I knew I would go long. I had a cup of coffee in the foyer, and that was a mistake. Yeah, so Felton, watch out. When you ask the questions later, I'm going to... I think the key for the future of libraries for any community, what I like to say, because I'm just Evan from Columbus, the future for libraries for any community is to find the sweet spot. So it's that special blend between the human piece that will always be around for libraries that's key, and the physical structure. And so long as that blend serves the entire community, there will be success. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Terry Schwarz, and I'm last. I have 12 minutes or less to talk to you about the future of cities, so I won't dawdle. My organization, the Cleveland Urban Design Collaborative, is the outreach division for the College of Architecture at Kent State. We do research, we work with communities all around the region and beyond on various urban design and community planning projects. A few years ago, the Gunn Foundation gave us some funding to conduct what we dubbed the Future City Sessions, where we brought experts from all over the country to come and talk and share a meal and discuss some of the kind of emerging trends and the directions that cities were going. And what I learned from that experience is that most of us are guessing. So that's the caveat I'll begin with here. Educated guessing, but it's still, kind of a guess. There's a lot of things that are unpredictable and far beyond our control. And so really, the further out you think, the more that there is just this indeterminacy that we have to kind of navigate. So in the popular imagination, when we think about the future of cities, sometimes it looks like this utopian, green, peaceful, prosperous sort of place. The idea, perhaps, that technology will eventually save us from the damage we've been doing to our planet. The other alternative there is a more dystopian view of the future, this kind of Hunger Games city that is, kind of devastated and brutal and polluted and dangerous. And I suspect, though, that the future isn't either, you know, a utopian thriving city or a devastated dystopian city, but probably, you know, kind of both of those things at the same time. Much like the cities that we inhabit now, you know, it's not kind of an either-or question. So when we think about the future of cities, you know, it's probably less useful to kind of project into the distance and try to predict what kinds of technological or ecological or political changes will occur, but rather to kind of think about shared values. You know, can we rally and build consensus around some shared values and then make our decisions around the kind of places that we'd like to inhabit? This image is from the Aspiring to the Beloved Community. It's the plan for the city of Atlanta that was adopted just a couple of years ago. And it's really lovely. If you have a chance to read it, it's easy to find online. Because it's focused around this idea that the decisions that the city makes should be about making the city beloved. This is a phrase from Dr. Martin Luther King, but like what are the ways, you know, kind of that cities can become more lovable? Closer to home, you know, this you know, legend in city planning. He lives among us. That's Norm Krumholz, an old friend of mine and an inspiration. When he was the planning director for the city of Cleveland, he had a really simple vision that he rallied his staff around, which was that their job was to create options for people who lack them. And if you think about that for a minute, it's just such a perfect encapsulation of what equity in an urban context really means. Plus, it's kind of appropriate. It works regardless of what time frame you find yourself in. So in 1969, you know, the Cuyahoga River was on fire, you know, and this idea that you can, you know, kind of work to make more choices for people who lack them, it made sense then. Fast forward today, while we're trying to like roll out the Internet of Things and deal with, you know, kind of the violence in the neighborhoods that's afflicting young people today, all of the problems and opportunities in 2019 also fit within this framework of trying to make more options for people who lack them. And I would suggest that even when we get to 2016 and we're all flying around in jetpacks or whatever the future will hold, that, you know, kind of if there's agreement around a set of values, that, you know, kind of those kinds of things are timeless and not dependent so much on the things we can't control. So I'm going to talk really quickly about sort of three areas of the sort of future city conversation. And those are smart cities, climate change, and degrowth. So we'll start with smart cities. I like this infographic because it claims to be all you need to know about smart cities, and it might be, I don't know. But, you know, kind of when we think about smart cities, it's a whole package of stuff, you know. It's about artificial intelligence. It's about remote sensing that gives us data about what are happening with buildings and infrastructure around a city or a region. It's about autonomous vehicles. It's about, you know, kind of smart hospitals and schools and all the ways that, you know, kind of our technology can move us forward into more of a data-driven and informed future. The part of smart cities that I think might be most relevant to the kind of work that you all are doing together is the notion of asset management, which of course is not a futuristic idea. Cities have always managed their assets. But what's possible now in terms of maintaining and upgrading and operating, you know, kind of the physical plant of a city, a school district, or a library, or all those three things combined, is that we can have such a vast amount of data constantly. And if we can navigate that data, it allows us to make really surgically precise decisions about where to put resources, where they'll do the most good at the moment when we most need them. So rather than having duplication or, you know, thinking about like the way that remote sensing can tell us when a road is about to fail. So you're not paving it too soon, you're not paving it too late, you're fixing that pothole right before, you know, for instance, my car might hit it on my way over here today. One other aspect, you know, kind of a smart cities I just want to touch on super briefly, which is this idea of, you know, kind of autonomous vehicles and the impact it's potentially going to have on our workforce, all the people who drive vehicles for a living. Smart cars, autonomous vehicles are not the future. They are already here. Obviously, there have been some serious setbacks, but if you've bought a car in the last couple of years, you know that it already has a lot of autonomous characteristics. My car is always nagging me to do something that I don't necessarily want to do. But the things that we're going to have to do as communities is figure out kind of what the trade-offs are and make decisions about how we want to deploy this technology for the good of our cities and our neighborhoods. This was a design competition from a couple of years ago based on, I would suggest, maybe kind of a utopian notion that, kind of smart cars, autonomous vehicles might actually, kind of reduce congestion to the point that some of our streets will just become, kind of parks or places where people can walk. I think a more nuanced discussion of autonomous vehicles is, kind of in this book that Sam Schwartz, who used to be the traffic commissioner for New York City, published last year, called No One at the Wheel. If you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend it. His point is that, kind of traffic safety and collisions will be most likely drastically reduced, but there are still some problems that may emerge. For instance, when autonomous vehicles and ride-sharing come together, it may make it so cost-effective for us to just, it almost already is, to just hit Lyft rather than get on public transportation. That means some of us, kind of will have more options. But the people who have the fewest, the most vulnerable members of our society, may be facing kind of a, kind of devastated transit system because there aren't enough resources to maintain it. He also raises points. By the way, Sam Schwartz is not at all related to me, a totally different person, different family. He also talks about the fact that, when we get to this certain point where it's so easy and so affordable to just hail a vehicle to drive us wherever we want to go, that things like diabetes and obesity are going to climb even faster than they already are, which is something maybe we haven't really thought about, but, kind of it is some of the perils of the technology and not just the benefits. The most important thing maybe from, kind of the question of autonomous mobility is that, it's not going to go from one day where we're all driving and the next day where cars are all driving themselves. We've got years, probably decades, kind of where very smart and rational machines will be coexisting with human drivers who are not always that rational, and so this kind of period of uncertainty and adjustment and chaos may go on for decades, especially in a place like Cleveland, where we sometimes, take a little bit longer to adopt new technologies. So thinking about those sorts of things in the context particularly of the future of cities is really important. Lastly, another thing that I suggest maybe that you might read as you begin this planning process is a document that was produced last year by the Fund for Our Economic Future called The Two Tomorrows. It spells out these two alternatives, one where we kind of go forward as a region with the things we've always done, and another where we make different kinds of choices and we go from being average to extraordinary. There are 10 points in the Two Tomorrows. I'm only going to touch on one of them here related to transportation, which is that a huge swath of our region, people don't have access to employment because of the decisions that we've made, the policies we've made around land use, and also, kind of the investments that we've made in transportation infrastructure. And that's harmful not only to the people who can't get to employment, but also to the employers who have jobs that they can't fill. And you may kind of wonder how this applies in Shaker Heights, but I think as an inner-ring suburb with excellent public transportation, you all may hold an important piece of this puzzle that can help our region work better and more, kind of equitably and economically. Okay, I better get to the other two topics. Climate change. This was a survey that was in the New York Times in 2017, which I think is really interesting in the beautiful way that it encapsulates human nature. In the diagram on the left, it shows the relatively high percentage of people in our country who believe that global warming will harm people in the United States. The diagram on the right shows the relatively small number of people who believe that global warming will harm them personally. And I think particularly here in the Great Lakes, we can become kind of complacent because we don't have to deal with things like wildfires and hurricanes and sea level rise. But it isn't to say that climate change isn't going to affect us, and in fact, it already is. Sorry for these kind of nerdy diagrams. They came from GLESA, which is the Great Lakes Integrated Sciences and Assessments out of the University of Michigan. And what they're showing is that, kind of here in Cleveland, temperatures have been rising at twice the rate that 3 times the rate than the national average. So we are experiencing more high heat days. We're experiencing more precipitation. That's the bottom diagram. That annual precipitation has risen almost 26% since the 1950s. And actually in the winter, it's closer to 60%, the more snow and rain that we're getting. Why that's important? Well, there's a lot of reasons why it's important, but probably the most significant one is this. My colleague Scott Sheridan in the geography department at Kent State has been mapping historical patterns of mortality against temperature. So this isn't a projection, this is what's happening now, that whenever the temperature rises above about 80 degrees, the mortality rate, which you see in this diagram, swoops right up. And it affects everyone, but primarily, people who are older, people who have lower incomes, and it affects the Black community in a really dramatic way. People don't die of climate, right? They don't die of weather, but the increase in cardiovascular problems and respiratory problems leads to an elevated death rate every single time that temperature climbs. How we can tie that back, though, to your question about libraries and schools and the city, maybe comes to this question of social capital. There are two really interesting books. So you can tell that I teach for a living. I'm making you a reading list, a syllabus. The Chicago heat wave in 1995 killed over 700 people. The Paris heat wave killed close to 15,000, and that was in 2003. Now, the reasons for that are really complex, and there are a lot of factors at play. But the one thing that researchers have found is that in neighborhoods where there are stronger social ties, where people know each other, either really tight as family members or even as just casual acquaintances, where there is social infrastructure, where the social safety net is intact, survival rates were much, much higher. The Kleinenberg book about the Chicago heat wave makes that point abundantly clear. And so, kind of one of the things that, kind of libraries and recreation centers and schools do really well is help people get to know each other, and people who know each other look out for each other. And in the event of, kind of bad things happening, those social relationships can make all the difference. Here's just a screenshot from the Chicago heat wave. When your power goes out, when you don't have air conditioning, where do you go? Do you feel safe enough to walk out in the neighborhood? Do you feel comfortable enough in your neighborhood to sleep outside rather than in your sweltering house? In Cleveland, there are two cooling centers, usually one on each side of the city. They're the same as recreation centers. They just keep the rec centers open longer. And if you happen to live near that rec center or feel comfortable kind of being there, kind of you have this kind of safe haven where you can go. But I would suggest that libraries in particular are a place where many people feel safe and can serve that same role. But even, kind of apart from, kind of a heat wave or another kind of environmental crisis, on a day-to-day basis, these public facilities really kind of create the community relationships that are really important to moving forward safely in this kind of unpredictable new world. Lastly, degrowth. This one may be the one that's the oddest, but let's just kind of go through it quickly. We think that sustainable development, green development, smart development, smart growth, these are good things, and I'm not arguing that they're not, but I think we also have to recognize that any development, even green development, has environmental consequences, and so there is this kind of growing thought community around this idea that the solution isn't to kind of build our way to sustainability. It's not to say we can never build another thing again, but that if we really want to, kind of preserve our planet for the generations that come after us, we have to do more than grow smart. We maybe have to grow less. And I know that that sounds not fun at all. People like making buildings, and kind of we enjoy all of the benefits of our, kind of modern society. But maybe it doesn't have to be as depressing as it might sound. I'm going to end here with one of my favorite futurists, who's Buckminster Fuller, architect and futurist. He speaks here about the kind of surplus that's all around us, so much so that we don't pay attention to it. Our beds are empty 2/3 of the time, our living rooms are empty 7/8 of the time, our office buildings are empty half the time. It's time we give this some thought. Of course, Bucky said that in 1959, and we haven't really given it all that much thought, but maybe now is that moment. And I think that we have an example kind of in our midst. I mean, libraries in particular. If libraries which were created to lend books, only lent books, they'd probably be empty most of the time. But libraries have gracefully and beautifully kind of adapted to serve the needs, whatever those needs are, of the communities that they're embedded in. And so I think that as you move forward in this process, kind of thinking about all the public infrastructure that kind of this wealth of, opportunity you have in this community, how it can be more intensively used. Because maybe we don't need to build more, we just need to use what we have more effectively. Lastly, a few years ago, we had this visiting artist from California, Janine Trublisky, and she had this kind of thought that Cleveland was a canary in the coal mine city. And so if you wanted to see the future, come to Cleveland, because most cities will end up, kind of experiencing a lot of the same challenges that we have. She brought a crystal ball to all of our public meetings and events, and because it was too heavy to fit in her carry-on back to California, she left it with us. So I'll just simply end by saying that I wish you great success with this planning process. And I am happy to lend you the crystal ball if you need it at any point. So thank you.
So I'm going to ask a few questions here, and then I'm going to open it up for our audience to have questions of the panel. So thinking about the future panels, what do you think are the opportunities for the intersections between the disciplines of the cities, education, and libraries? And I will start with Michele.
Okay, is this on? Yeah. I think a lot of the intersection we've already discussed in terms of shared use and space. Some of the things that I think could be utilized in this community is the idea of shared space around health clinics and supports for seniors, whether at the school facility or at the library facility or even at one of the municipal spaces that you currently have. In its people can be a little protective of their own space, but I think if there's, quality scheduling and opportunity for some surveys from each member of the community to say what they'd like to see as part of that, it can happen. I also think beyond just the health and the cross sections between seniors, and recently on an educational trip to China, a few of the schools that were close to one of the airports there had child care centers from, I think age 6 months up to age 4. And at first I was kind of like, ooh, that's a lot. And the way that they kind of help support families all together from cradle up until graduation, and then even considering that the senior center there was also in that shared space was also pretty cool, and ended up being a lot better and more helpful for the whole community, not just the parents who could find a way to bring all their kids to one place for childcare.
And I have to echo some of that, but first, something that you said about folks being perhaps a little territorial about their own space really resonated with me, because that's a hard mentality to kind of break down. And I'm really encouraged because it's not often that I encounter a community when working with libraries that has already kind of started this conversation like tonight. I'm very impressed. We have the mayor, the Board of Education, the library board working together, being intentional about the partnership and really making the time to make something happen. I'm thinking about my time back at the Westerville Public Library, a suburb of Columbus, and the library director there, who has since retired, was very intentional about having quarterly meetings with the other major players in the community, and it was for that very same reason. They would get in a room, it was a set date with an agenda, and they would actually develop something from it. And I love that Shaker is taking those steps. I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of thinking about perhaps embedded staff, or like a flexible model where library staff can do their work outside of the four walls of the library at a city entity, or in collaboration with school staff for sure, and vice versa. I think that is the key. But again, just the bedrock, the being intentional about it, I think you have to start there, for sure.
Terry?
I'm not sure I have anything to add. Those are really good and thorough answers.
Yeah,
Let me just say,
Go ahead.
Felton, my education teacher had background. It's not as though teachers are selfish in general or pack rats or anything. Some of us are, and I count myself as that. You just never knew when you were going to need to use those 5th grade science books after 14 years of teaching 1st grade. And if you let them go, you might not have gotten them. So, I mean, it's not intentional in terms of, and I'm not sure about library staff, but it's understanding that as resources come and go and flow, understanding the experts that are on the classroom level and knowing what their needs versus their wants are. And so understanding that is really important before you start putting together maps of who's going to share this space when. Because the minute 5 extra kids end up in your school and they're kind of somewhere, then there's not enough workbooks or there's too many chairs, and you know, that library lady comes in and she messes with my desks, then it becomes harder for the instruction to occur. So I just want to make sure that it's not it's intentional, but having that voice of how does this roll out is going to be really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a need to be nimble and willing to kind of change on a dime. Yep. If you know, there's, like you said, 6 extra people that show up that you weren't intending or what have you. One of the reasons I think that I was asked to be a part of this panel was to talk about, you know, some harebrained things that I've seen in library land, and this question that Felton asked about opportunities for intersections, it made me think of a public library, and I wish I could remember the name. It's in central Pennsylvania, but literally the city's transit authority office resides in the library. And it was because they had done a study that showed that their library patron base was basically treating the library as kind of like a de facto transit stop. It was one of the busiest stops on the transit, and so the city thought, why not? Let's just have our folks live there, for lack of a better term, and then they can help educate the library staff or directly help the patrons then who need assistance with bus transfers or what have you. And I just thought that was kind of interesting and something that I haven't seen in Ohio, but it might exist. Full disclaimer, I have not been to all 251 public libraries in the state, but I've been around a few.
So Terry, the second question is for you. To start with is, what is the most unique or creative idea that you have seen recently that has the ability to disrupt our current thinking around cities and then ultimately schools, and then, you know, we could talk about libraries as well.
So that's a really tough one, Felton. You're not going to let me punt on that one, too?
Nope, you're first.
So, I mean, I think it's not necessarily, you know, kind of the most revolutionary idea, but this kind of notion about buildings and infrastructure that can truly multitask. A lot of the cognitive science says that we as humans are not really capable of multitasking, but that doesn't mean that our buildings and our infrastructure can't. You know, so if we really thought and took that idea to an extreme, I love the idea of building, you know, kind of housing into kind of facilities that people don't traditionally live in. I'd live at the library. But so, I mean, they're sort of thinking about the ways that, you know, kind of buildings can, you know, kind of clean the air, that, you know, that things that we use for part of the day could, you know, kind of morph into something else and be useful in other ways. I think that that could potentially be transformative, especially in, you know, kind of smaller communities that, you know, kind of have, you know, kind of shared facilities.
Michele?
I agree. I think the idea of being agnostic, the classroom was not mine as a teacher. The office I occupy right now at the county building is not mine. It belongs to the people that utilize that space. I know that a lot of schools, and I think Shaker's one of the school districts that does have a lot of opportunities for after-school hours. I know that they've done a lot with sharing, even when they're doing collective bargaining negotiations, that they kind of intentionally met outside of their space, either at the fire district or at some other place, and keeping in mind the understanding the ability of space includes comfort and territory, but then kind of helping suspend and being agnostic about the space, but actually more about the student or the work. Or I love the idea about utilizing, I know RTA is also looking for supports and funding in different kinds of ways to collaborate. So actually utilizing a public space that would benefit both the library as well as public transportation, I think would be something that would, you know, you kind of got to want something that's kind of like a cool hook to something. So I think that that would be another way of utilizing it. And also keeping in mind MOUs around keeping buildings open. We went through a lot of those struggles, And sometimes those struggles were real, and sometimes they were more ways of getting in the way of actually getting to actually sharing the space. So being able to suspend belief on what's really getting in the way and to kind of dig a little deeper, I think will be help understand. 9 out of 10 times there is a cost factor, but there is a cost factor with shared dollars in some other way that I hope that you'll be able to get through to where you're having the schools, the library, and other municipal buildings open and cross-sharing.
Anything there for you, Evan, or what's
you
disrupting libraries?
You know I have something to share.
Yes, please.
So, you know, a unique or creative idea I've seen, I think that disrupts. Disrupt is kind of a loaded word there, but for me, there's this trend towards the human library. I alluded to this in the presentation, you know, the library is more than 4 walls, it's the folks that staff it. But beyond that, this concept of checking out knowledge and checking out expertise and having an opportunity to have human contact in a world that is not so full of human contact anymore, for right or for wrong, I'm not here to judge. But I have seen libraries that have created programming where it's booking a staff member to talk about X, Y, Z. I've seen libraries that have had programs on civility and empathy in terms of lining up perhaps folks that are from other cultures or from other socioeconomic backgrounds to talk about their upbringing and things that are problematic for them in the world that we live in right now, and really kind of elucidate that, not just for library staff, but for the public. And I know that some of that is kind of scary, and oh gosh, you know, there might be, people might get offended or not come to the program or whatever. I think libraries have this just inherent goodwill about them, and I think that we're living in a time where we have to trade on that goodwill a little bit. If you think about it, libraries are one of the few spaces where you can come in the moment the building opens and stay until the moment the building closes, and you do not have to buy a cup of coffee at Starbucks and use the Wi-Fi, as long as you are, using the space respectfully, and you can stay there. We don't ask anything of you except that you patronize the library. So I think that there's an opening there, and I think that is kind of disruptive to what people traditionally think library services are.
And I'll add on to that. One of the things that was the trend 10 years ago was this idea of starting with bookless libraries, and San Antonio went and created the bookless library, and everybody was like, is this going to be the new trend in libraries? And so far, San Antonio has been the only library to do the bookless library. Whereas what the trend that you see that is disrupting libraries across the country is this idea of who are we partnering with that we're going to bring into our buildings. Mm-hmm. So in Cleveland, we have Ohio Means Jobs inside our library, or we'll have the Cleveland Food Bank in our libraries and spaces for them. And so libraries across the country are just like the art, like the transportation folks in Pennsylvania. Everyone is looking for who in our community brings us value, and then we're going to give them space and allow them to provide that value for our community. And that's the disruptor. All right, so our next question before we open it up to the public is, based on your presentations, what's the impact on the facilities or the physical spaces of these, whether it's the physical spaces of the city or the library or the schools?
So I'll start. I've worked on a few different master plans, and just some things that are important to note. Lakewood did I think a pretty good job visioning out what their school buildings were going to look like, and I think it was a 12-year project, and they tried to make sure that they were bringing part of the architectural elements in each of the buildings and had a vision and plan for all of their schools, versus the Cleveland schools, which has tried to go through segments. Lakewood did segments too, but theirs were not as, we wanted to harvest some architectural pieces of certain buildings, but there were some that wanted some new. So they tried to tailor it to each specific community. So those are both big. Lakewood's big, but also the Cleveland is so big. So keeping that in mind, I just want to make sure you know that anytime you talk about renovations, it's always more expensive and it's always over budget. That said, renovations are extremely, I mean, John Hay's renovation, oh gosh, I think it's still not done. And it's something that usually people want, but also anytime you want to do something like that, it's important to note that tearing down and building new is always less expensive. Anytime you get funding from the OFCC, which is the Ohio Facilities Commission, which the state budget said that they wanted to try to put some more money into that, they will give you the bare bones basic, cinder block, not a wood floor. So all communities end up having to help support costs around that. I think when you think about facilities, I think it's also important to think about grade bands, especially in a school, and whether it's a middle school or a traditional middle school. I know, again, back to Cleveland, they went from K-5 middle school, high school, they went to a K-8 design, and the reason that all schools in Cleveland are a K-8 design had a lot to do with the safety and the parochial care that they wanted students in the middle schools to have. That's been a trade-off to now career tech and internships are so important to get students in their minds about what their career or college is going to be like. So there is a thought to making sure that middle school gets those same sort of internships, different kind of career technical opportunities that used to have in the past. So when you're thinking about schools and facilities, consider grade constructions or grade banding, and also consider the ideas of high school specifically could not only be on the physical campus, but in all other parts and places with regards to ensuring safety and all the other concerns that always happen. So just want to make sure you keep those things in mind.
Okay.
I'm kind of wondering if we're going to reach a point eventually where, kind of municipal boundaries cease to matter or maybe begin to matter less. I think the library is already there. I am out and about a lot, and I don't look for a Starbucks, I look for a library, and it doesn't matter. I live in Cleveland Heights, but I hang out in libraries all over the place. That's a different model, of course, than schools and municipal facilities. I can't go splashing around in the Beechwood pool. They wouldn't like that. But I wonder if we'll reach the point, where and I know there's a whole kind of economic question, and it makes people super uncomfortable to think about boundaries being broached in that way. But if we really want to have a less fragmented society, and we are living in a time of extreme fragmentation, it's probably the civic infrastructure, it's these institutions that are the only thing that are going to be able to stitch us back together.
It's the 59 communities, the multiple municipality disorder of Cuyahoga County?
Yeah.
Yes, I've heard. Yeah, but how do you make sure that you're providing the localism and the flavor that continues to bring people to choose certain communities over other? What I would suggest is making sure that the localism and the flavor of what's different between Shaker and Orange and Rocky River exists, but there's some behind-the-scenes municipal services that can be shared and as you said, opened up cross-region.
Any thoughts?
I think Michele and Terry hit the nail on the head.
Oh, you punted.
I would
I did.
agree. So let's open it up for if you have a question, come on down. Please ask the question at the microphone. Don't be shy. Yeah, absolutely.
Can you hear me? Hi, good night. So Mayor Weiss described these entities as the three taxing authorities in Shaker Heights. And I think about my property value over the last 12 years that we've lived here having been stagnant. I think about my property taxes having gone up by 1/3 in that same time frame. I'm not sure I'm getting additional services, et cetera, in that time frame to make up for that. I want to know where the dollars and cents savings are. No one's addressed that topic, the cost savings. And I'm sorry if it means reduction in staff somewhere or an elimination of a building somewhere, but let's talk about that topic as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that the panelists weren't necessarily brought forward to answer that question. I don't know if the mayor wants to answer that question, or this is really a topic of like thinking forward and how we can, and,
I
kind
can
of
jump
like
at it,
examine the
though.
panelists. But
Yeah,
go
I
ahead,
can try.
Michele, if you want.
So, and I'm looking only at, I'm looking at the Say Yes model, and that's in Cleveland. And what I can see from my purview in terms of cost savings, and this is not to attribute to anything that's going to happen or could happen, is when you have so many employees in the county who are responsible for social work, who are responsible for family engagement, who are responsible for Jobs Ohio and internships, and then you have those same employees who are responsible for family and community engagement at the Cleveland Public School District, and then you have the same amount of employees who are responsible at the Cleveland Municipal City Recreation, and also responsible for job services and responsible for community engagement. Those are 3 different entities with 3 different sources of employees, all struggling to do the exact same goal, and there are still gaps. And I have seen through the bureaucracies that I've worked with, and again, Cleveland was under mayoral control of the school district, so you would have thought there'd be more alignment, and in many ways there is. But there is still that idea of, as a parent or a taxpayer that wants to know when the pools are open, or wants to know when the rec centers are open, that there's 3 different opportunities that they can find out, both the county government, the city government, and the school district government. So I would not presume that there would be any big changes, but I know that there's some political capital and ways of being able to look at your current assets in organizations, both the school district, the library system, and the municipality, that there could be some potential cost savings there.
Yeah, and I could double on that. So the library in the Say Yes model, Cleveland Public Library is very much involved in that. And so our finances were examined within that on how we can provide, look at where we're providing some of those similar programs that were being provided by all of those, and then how we could all squeeze out savings and efficiencies within that to provide the best services for the community. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, good evening. For us to move forward together, we need more together. So what ways, and I don't know if the panel can answer it or the mayor and everyone else, are we advertising this? It almost needs to be a grassroots, door-to-door, to get people here to be involved, to know that our city's even thinking of this.
I would agree. We've worked with Cobalt, Patty Chobe, and I know in Cleveland Schools I know you know Patty too. Yeah. Most recently, to help ensure that the word is getting out, that you will, and even no matter how hard you try, I mean, I think maybe our libraries and the social media can kind of get folks that you want to be engaged and come here. This is by far a bigger crowd than I think I've ever experienced in any of their community outreach in prior ways. So I want to, give kudos to the folks that are here, but also know that there's always ways you can do better. And I do think that grassroots opportunity, and that's what we've done with, well, that's what I don't work there anymore, the Cleveland schools have done successfully in the past, is that flyering, that door knocking, that continued campaign around awareness, so to speak.
And I think there's a challenge for all of us who are residents of the Shaker community to go out and talk to folks about the fact that this conversation continues and will continue ongoing over the next few months, so that, if, as you've been here and attended, as other programs are going to be in April, that you talk to your community, talk to your neighbors about coming and being here and being a part of the conversation. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. I really enjoyed everything that was said. And for those of you who don't know, I'm a member of the Library Board of Trustees as well. And we just recently, in the last 2 years, had a big conversation about maintaining and renovating existing buildings versus building new. And so obviously there's a strong point of view that's been presented about new construction. And I wanted to just ask the panel in general, what financial and social value do you place or have you seen placed on historical buildings? I think that one of the things that struck me talking about new construction was the idea that we couldn't get a photograph of the most state-of-the-art school because the minute you put it up there, there'd be a newer one. And I think all of us who enjoy our beautiful historic neighborhoods We're glad that houses next to us weren't torn down and rebuilt in the 60s with the state-of-the-art architecture that was available then. And we're dealing with a middle school that was built in that time period that's definitely showing some age. So I'm just curious what value, if any, you place on historic preservation from a city planning point of view, and how do you recommend that districts like ours invest in new construction when trends change and technology changes at such a rapid pace? How can we be assured that any new investment is a long-lasting one? Thank you.
So I don't know, this is just my opinion here, but I don't think you should ever throw away something that's still useful, right? You know, and so the idea that we're so often chasing the latest in technology seems kind of silly to me. Most buildings can be retrofitted in one way or another. I think that we've gotten into the habit of thinking that new construction is cheaper in large part because of the way that the state of Ohio funds, you know, kind of school construction. But it isn't really true. If you have something, I mean, the greenest building you have is the one that's already here. And, you know, kind of clearly in a city like Shaker Heights, where historic preservation and the character of the community is your calling card, you know, kind of protecting the resources you have should be job one, which isn't to say you have to preserve everything forever, but, you know, kind of recognizing the value of existing is clearly should be one of the fundamental parts of your planning process.
It's interesting, around the state of Ohio, there's such a, I don't want to say 50-50 split, but it seems like, at least at the libraries that I've visited, it's this split between a new build versus we are still making it work in the Carnegie from 1898. I mean, it's either one or the other, and it really, I think that's why when I started my presentation and kind of moving towards this idea of, okay, you know, I'm not necessarily equipped with the knowledge to know about architecture and costs and what that entails, but if we can think about spaces inside whatever building you land on that's modular, that's nimble, that can be, you know, changed or retrofitted almost at a moment's notice to serve whatever the community need might be. That's what excites me. And so when I'm, you know, when I'm on the Indiana border visiting a library over in the western part of the state, and they're in a Carnegie building that's, you know, beautiful from the outside, but perhaps crumbling on the inside, but they're still making it work. They've got, you know, they've got the tables and the chairs and the bookshelves and the computer racks that all can move to the periphery of a room so that they can have a poet or an actor or an event take place in that space. I'm like, wow, they're really thinking, they're making the best of this situation. But then the same thing can be said for the more modern facilities that Columbus Metropolitan is putting all around the city as well, with glass and chrome and all of that.
And I'll make sure you know, I live in a 105-year-old house in Lakewood, so I'm not somebody that wants you to tear down and build new. I want to make sure that when you are visioning, that you consider all of these options and understanding how you can, and you're going to have to somehow provide extra support if you do want to retrofit or renovate. I think it's always better to go in with understanding the limitations before you start visioning too far out to be able to understand. I think understanding basic needs, especially when concerned with climate change, as Terry had mentioned, you need to find a facility that can be air conditioned, especially as the school years and school dates are changing in a growing warmer climate. I'm not sure if all Shaker schools are air conditioned or not. All right. For the health and the safety and and the instructional integrity that needs to happen in your classrooms, you've got to find a way to do this. I also want to make sure that you understand that the suggestions around tearing down, the battles that we have over preservationists around certain school buildings has really delayed a lot of progress and a lot of substandard conditions for school buildings, because neighbors like the way the building looks, but you're not an educator or a student that is sitting in there, especially when the sun comes through the side and it's 102 degrees in there in the middle of September. Even though you started earlier, it's the September heat wave that caused closings of schools. The part that I mentioned in my presentation is understanding when a school has good bones and is able to be contained and put forward to a space where you can preserve the physical integrity of the school building versus having a building that was retrofitted in the 60s that is currently using space. The planning process that goes into this and understanding where your swing space is going to be, how you're going to disrupt, if you're going to disrupt a whole group of students and where they're going to go in their really important high school years as you're considering how to right-size a school district and understanding that space-based placement of educational opportunities do not just exist in a school building. So I completely agree with both of our panelists here, but also understanding in the real interest of your taxpayers, understanding how much they're paying versus how much we're using here, is understanding that these kinds of discussions have a lot of heart and feelings and happy and anger about it. And then I just feel that if you continue to work and collaborate about the idea of the student and the people, you're going to find a way to put it into spaces that are going to preserve the property value, integrity of the community, but also be able to provide opportunities for better education.
And let me just add to that. At the Cleveland Public Library, we have 6 libraries that are Carnegie buildings. They're over 100 years old. And recently we had renovated one. And we went to the community and asked them, we had folks who had lived there a very long time who were really passionate about the library, and newer residents who weren't so passionate about the library. And the CDC came in and brought all the community members together and asked them what was the best future for their community. And they said it was to renovate that library and bring it up to the future. And we worked with an architect who understood how to keep the basics of the architecture there and then make it a modern day library. And it has been phenomenal for the community. And so sometimes you just have to do that extra work that is needed to figure out how do you move forward with what the community wants, one way or the other. I think you're next. Yes. Okay.
Thank you for your time. And I was inspired by most of your presentations, but Terry, I was actually most inspired by yours because you focused a lot on the problems and then what were the solutions. And I actually find it challenging to evaluate solutions without really understanding what might be the most critical problems that face our community specifically. So I'm curious if you were to prioritize maybe one problem, or has the leadership communicated maybe one problem specific to our community? Each one of you, I'd be interested to hear that.
I actually don't feel entirely qualified. I worked here in Shaker Heights for 10 years, so you would think I'd have a response to that, but you know, at this point in my career, I work in some of the most devastated parts of the region. And we're also working in Haiti. So I'm going to say to you, Shaker Heights, you ain't got no problems. You're fine. It's going to be okay. I don't know. I mean, maybe, you know, kind of someone from the city can talk about what sort of motivated this planning process. Because, I mean, I think it's all right to kind of plan and develop visions that aren't just about fixing problems, but really about enhancing assets. And maybe that's the nature of this work.
So for me, it was a local government fund in the state of Ohio and the considerable, and again, this is Michele's opinion, and when I'm the Director of Regional Collaboration, I look at this from a global sense and a Cuyahoga County sense, not a Shaker Heights specific sense or even a Lakewood sense of where I'm coming from. But I know that the tensions around the cuts to state funding that results in cuts from the Kasich administration to the local government funds has created some situations where all of local government, not just Shaker, not just Chagrin Falls, but everybody as a whole doing more with less dollars. I also think that the idea for me about what the biggest issue facing Shaker is not Shaker specific. As I mentioned earlier, it's about how do you right-size education in a space that is no longer contained by 4 walls. And at the point in juncture, I think it's great that the leaders here have not waited until the buildings are crumbling or until there's a real need, either in using your tax dollars and make them go farther or whatever it is, but to kind of take an assessment to say, what can we do to help support ensuring that families are choosing Shaker, families are staying in Shaker, and families are want to grow old here.
And for me, kind of approaching this from a statewide level, I guess, the problem that we're faced, it seems, is just the continued perception of a library's relevance. Quite frankly, we get pushback quite a bit on, like, well, you know, going back to Felton's joke, oh, well, we've got Google on our phone, so why do we need libraries? I know, that hurts my heart. But, you know, the issue remains the fact that libraries have evolved and changed quite a bit. And so kind of the thought exercise that I did at the beginning of my talk, where I asked you to shut your eyes and think about that kind of nostalgia of what the library used to be, it really has grown and changed. And I always encourage people, even people who are power users of the library, I always encourage them to just set forth into the building, chat up a staff member, ask about a service, ask about something that you are curious about, that you're inherently curious about, and just see what it is that the library might be able to do for you. Again, that need for that human connection, a library is a great place to get that. Obviously, be respectful of the library staff members' time if there's a long line of people that need assistance. But I find that when I do focus groups in communities around the state to help libraries with strategic planning, the questions they ask or the pushback that I get is about a library's perceived relevance, but they just don't know what the library has to offer. And I think there's always something to be discovered. And I would, not being from this community and just setting foot here tonight for the first time, that would be my encouragement to push back against the problem of perceived relevance of the library.
All right, so with the timing, we want to make sure, I know we have 2 people who want to ask questions. These will be the last 2 questions of the night. Ladies first.
So I guess my question might also be more for the elected officials, not so much for the panel, but the newspaper said that there's an 11-member task force that they were talking about, and they named some names. But with the idea that the outlook and the point of view and the perspective of the task force members can really color the outcome of the process, I was wondering how will the task force members be determined? Was it done by the boards and the council? Did they adopt a resolution? Did they request, you know, people to come forward who were interested in the process? Did they then vet the people and adopt them in a resolution? And what were the dates of the resolutions, and so on and so forth? So more question is, where did the task force come from? And is that just an ad hoc task force for right now, and then will there be a permanent one, or is that the names that were given, are those the final people? And did the elected people decide that these are going to be our representatives on these task force, or did it just come forward as sort of, yeah, I feel like doing this sort of a thing? So that's my question.
Did you want to? Okay. We'll take the last question, then the mayor will come up and have.
Hi, my question is, as I hear about all these things, I start to wonder, is there either an explicit or implicit overlap with economic development, which is another one of the city's pushes at the current time? How can they work together, or do they at all?
Terry?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. We met Cameron. He's all over this. Where's Cameron?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
there he is, back there. Yeah, you're on this, right? Thumbs up? Yeah, they're going to work on the economic development part as well. Again, knowing that Shaker doesn't have as many American greetings or is more small business, I think you're kind of landlocked in some ways, but I think bringing together the planners, economic development, more task force members, all of those things I think will make for a better product and be able to bring a more larger tax base in with which to help support some of the hopeful things that you want to do. So I think people have to understand that, you know,
when you're looking at building something, even like a library, it can always be an economic development driver. For instance, we're building a new library, Martin Luther King Library in University Circle, and a developer is going to come and build an apartment complex on top of us, and they're calling it Library Lofts. So the extension of those two buildings being connected is a way that they've driven this big economic driver of bringing in this, with the library being the foundation of it. So with that said, Mayor, you want to come up? I just wanted to make one acknowledgement, and that was Ann Clavora. Would you stand up, please? Ann was the one that put all of this together and got all of us, all things. So I just wanted to make sure we thanked her for her hard work. Okay.
Well, a couple of things. First, let me say again, thank you for coming. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. If I were to answer or try to answer your questions, all of the questions tonight, we'd be here probably for another couple hours. But let me maybe say a little bit about the thinking behind this process. Maybe for better or for worse, you know, if you're looking to point a finger or blame someone, it would probably be me in terms of why we're all here. And part of it is, as mayor, and also I think as elected officials of our taxing authorities, one of the things that we're paid to do, and of course it goes without saying that we work for you. But one of the things that I think you pay us to do is one of the most challenging things that we have to do, which is, I think, is predicting the future. I mean, you think about all the problems that we address on a day-to-day basis, a large part of it comes down to predicting the future. What are we doing today that will put us in a position to compete 5, 10, 15 years down the road? We get caught up so often, and I will admit I'm the first, I'm Exhibit A. We get caught up in what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, and we get caught up in what's the problem du jour? What happens when you walk into the office, there's a problem, there's been a crisis, there's been this or that. And what I found in terms of why, frankly, I chose to run for mayor was to say, what do I want our community to be in the future? What do I want Shaker? What do we want Shaker to be? How do we become attractive for our children and our children's children to come back to Shaker? And there are a couple things that came to my mind as part of the genesis of this process, and that is we can't necessarily rely on what we've done in the past to make us successful in the future. And one of the things that I struggled with as a taxpayer and as a resident is the struggle that we've had to pay for aging infrastructure, aging homes, aging roads, aging buildings, and how we have done it in the past as 3 separate taxing authorities living in our silos and doing our own thing and raising our own money in an uncoordinated way where we as taxpayers or residents were bombarded by the latest need, whether it be a nonprofit or the city or the schools. And so some of the thinking behind this process was, how can we act on a coordinated basis, and instead of thinking about a school building or a community building or a library, talk about them as community assets. These are things that make us special, and these are the things that hopefully will continue to make us special going forward. So that's really the genesis of the plan that the taxing authorities, and I use that as just as a way, this is where we started the process. But I think and to address a couple of the questions about sort of membership and also how we're getting the word out, we started initially with the 3 taxing authorities, but and the task force is really just made up at the moment of representatives from the 3 taxing authorities. But that's really just to get the process rolling. And this was a first step in getting people to think about the process. There will be tremendous outreach into the community and get lots of feedback. I think it was Brian Glazer that mentioned the Van Aken district 20 years ago. We had a whole process of community engagement, elected officials, experts. We hired planners, a number of transportation people to help us develop a plan. And my concept is that we would do something similar in this process. We'd get expertise as well as community input and come up with a plan that's trying to predict the future. We're trying to predict where this community needs to be 5 or 10 years or more down the road. So without going into each question, I hope I've addressed at least part of the questions that you have raised tonight, and we will continue to do that. The meeting on the 11th will be the next opportunity for broader public input. On the communication side, by the way, just so you can go out and tell your friends and colleagues and neighbors, we're trying to tap every communications channel that we can. So we've established a separate web page. So we'll have, for instance, the videotape of this event we'll have posted. We are trying to work through social media. We are working through so high tech to low tech. I think we had flyers in school backpacks. So we're trying to get the word out throughout the community. The neighborhood associations and so forth will all be ways that we will eventually work our way. But we appreciate you coming tonight to be our first set of ambassadors, if you will, to get the word out about what we're doing out into the community. And we look forward to further conversations with you. So with that, let me just close maybe by thank you to our moderator and our panelists, and also our staff for, I know we called out Ann, but there's staff for all three of the city and the library and the schools that provided great support. So thank you again for coming, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.